hello, almost as long as there has been a Games Workshop, there has been a White Dwarf, and over the years it has taken a great many forms. Now, it is not possible to take a long-running and consistently changeable magazine like White Dwarf and categorically say which issues are the best. But that doesn't mean we can't try. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm sharing 5 of my favourite issues of White Dwarf. Okay, so categorically best issues is definitely not something we are aiming for here today because there will be blood in the comments if we do. This is just my 5 favourites at this time of recording. But before we get into the rules and the issues, let's just have a quick word from today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Into the AM, a company that make graphic t-shirts and lots of other types of cool, exciting apparel. Now, this is the first time I've ever done a sponsored video segment like this, so please bear with me. I will try and make it interesting and informative. I was a little bit skeptical, I will admit, when Into the AM reached out to me, because if you've watched the channel before, you will know that I pretty much exclusively wear black t-shirts and cardigans. And I know that Into the AM do lots of really cool, exciting designs. I've seen them advertised elsewhere, I've seen other people wearing them out in the streets, out and about, and they look ace, but that's just not my style. So I took a look at the website, and I wanted to see if there was anything that would suit me and feel right for me. And thankfully, there were loads of amazing choices. There was just lots of awesome stuff to look at and to check out. Into the AM make a huge range of really exciting, interesting, and frankly pretty cool graphic t-shirts. As they say on the website, they present a curated collection of graphic t-shirts, tank tops, and hoodies, classic polos, stylish button-up shirts, comfortable tees, and more, offering a comprehensive selection that caters to different occasions and personal styles. Into the AM said that they would send me through a selection of their range in order for me to try it out before I committed to doing any kind of advertising for them, and I am really glad that they did. They sent me through some cool graphic t-shirts and some jumpers, which are really, really nice. But I was really drawn to the black t-shirt, as you might expect. It was very soft, it feels really nice, I think it is a great fit, and I think they've done a terrific job. Plus, it's not covered in Martha's fur, yet at least. And I am really, really pleased to have been able to try out the Into the AM stuff. And if you want to try it out, you can use my link in the description below to get 10% off your order at checkout. And that covers all of the stuff that's on the site. There's loads of amazing options that you can go and have a look at and just see if you fancy giving them a go. Whether you go for some of the awesome graphic design tees, the multi-buy bundles, the fantastic shirts and jumpers, or even like me, you choose to stick to the understated elegance of a plain black t-shirt, I am pretty confident that there's going to be something for you on the site. Just remember to tell them that I sent you by using my link in the description below, and that's how you'll get 10% off your order at Into the AM. Now, let's get back to the video and let's find out which are the best issues of White Dwarf. There I go again. Did I say best? I meant favourite. That's because there's no way to actually really work it out. The rubric for this is just what do I think is my favourite right now. Every single time I look at my White Dwarf collection, a new issue takes that top spot. So this is just at the time of writing and recording what I think are the best issues. And I'm looking at the content, I'm looking at the art, the heavy metal, the photos, the games that are covered, and amazing covers are obviously going to be a big factor too. And that warmness of nostalgia for my original reading of these issues is going to play a part as well. But before we actually get into my top 5 list, let's do a very brief run through the history of White Dwarf. After founding Games Workshop in 1975, Sir Ian Livingstone, Steve Jackson, and John Peake decided to launch a magazine about games. And that magazine was Owl and Weasel. And though it started with a broader board game remit, it, in time, much like GW as a whole, became increasingly focused on Dungeons and Dragons. Games Workshop soon leaned more heavily into role-playing games, and they wanted a magazine that was more polished, more professional, and more credible than Owl and Weasel as a zine had ever been. So, in 1977, the first issue of White Dwarf was published. It covered the whole gamut of the role-playing market, and because it would speak to science fiction games like Traveller as much as to fantasy games like D&D, editor Ian Livingstone was keen to come up with a name that worked for both genres, hence White Dwarf, a fantasy character and a big old space star. Amongst the articles in issue 1 were an introduction to competitive D&D by Fred Hemmings, an analysis of Steve Jackson's favourite board game, The Warlord, and some D&D puzzles by David Wells. There was also a breakdown of the Monster Mark system that had been developed by Don Turnbull, a way to score the might of monsters for D&D. Soon, there would be regular features emerging, like the Fiend Factory, a regular presentation of newly invented monsters for use in D&D, which later spawned a Citadel Miniatures range and a TSR UK sourcebook as well, the Fiend Folio. From that first issue of White Dwarf, new games were reviewed in a feature called Open Box, and that would be joined in time by literary criticism in the form of Critical Mass, written by David Langford. After Brian Ansell took over Games Workshop, he became concerned about the value of White Dwarf given its focus on RPG content rather than miniatures and wargames, as well as its independent reviews, which had in the past given bruising coverage to Citadel products. So, along with the rest of GW's operations, Ansell moved the White Dwarf editorial team to Nottingham, though most declined the invitation and instead told them to sod off on the contents page. Over the next 20 issues, White Dwarf evolved into something new, a house magazine for Games Workshop, which is to say, Citadel, their games and their releases. Robin Dews essentially invented the battle report before he even worked for GW, with his 24 Hours at Carrick Mound event. And then he would go on to become the magazine's editor. Sometime later, White Dwarf introduced card inserts so that you could cut out terrain pieces and game components and cards. The dwarf got fat, and then it got terribly thin. It has featured tales of many gamers, countless new rules and chapter-approved stat lines, Stillmania, Illuminations, and battle reports for pretty much every GW game there's been. It truly has been an institution that has defined the hobby. So, with all of those issues and all of those articles, there have been some absolute classics, some stoters of the highest order. But where to begin with the best? Well, I would say let's start at number 5. And for that, I've selected issue 88. I've chosen this issue for a few reasons, not the least of which is that the breadth of content in here is just fantastic. Meaty articles on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Judge Dredd Roleplay, Chainsaw Warrior, Citadel Miniatures, AD&D, RuneQuest, and Call of Cthulhu, as well as all the regular stuff like the review sections, Open Box and Critical Mass, the art coverage in Illuminations, and the comic strip Thrud, as well as, sadly, Gobbledygook. Lewis Foti, Jervis Johnson, and Mark Gascoigne provided rules for using Megacity street judges in Blood Bowl. And there was more Judge Dredd with a scenario by Hugh Tynan that is accompanied by some just fantastic Brett Ewan's art. Graham Davis wrote about the use of fate points in Woofrup First Edition, and there was also a Goblin Army list written by Richard Halliwell and Rick Priestley. Oh, and rules for the Snotling Pump Wagon. This is just a great issue all around. It's fun to read, but there's loads of utility here as well. You can use most of these rules and pages in many different games. And all of that with one of my favourite White Dwarf covers ever, David Gallagher's Dragon Lady. In 4th place, I've gone for issue... who knows what number it is, because for a weird period, they just used dates. September 2016. This was an issue that, in my opinion, came after a relatively dry spell for Great White Dwarfs, but it was one where they did decide to go all out and to bring it back. The issue came with a free Slaughter Priest model taken from Gorechosen, and there are features about Gorechosen and its launch as well. The main feature for the issue was actually a set of rules, missions, and characters for almost the entire recent GW boxed games range. There is stuff in here for Deathwatch Overkill, Betrayal at Calth, Lost Patrol, Assassinorum Execution Force, Gore Chosen, and of course, the big box boys themselves, Space Hulk and Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. There are even rules for using the new Grombrindal mini, the White Dwarf himself, in both Age of Sigmar and Silver Tower. The box games have always been some of my favourite things that Games Workshop make, so to see an issue lavish so much love on them is just really nice. These are not all game-changing rules, but they do add to the replayability, and there is some really awesome stuff amongst it. In third place, it's issue 187. There is not a ton of new content in this issue, but it was an early one for me in the hobby, and it really fired up my imagination like nothing else. The Dave Gallagher cover and big preview in the issue was for the new 4th edition book, Warhammer Armies Dark Elves. The feature explored the lands of Chill and the evil elves that lived within it. More or less entirely off the back of this issue, I went on to collect a Dark Elf army, and I had them for quite a while. It really did just get me super excited about the Warhammer world and this particular faction. Similarly, there is also a preview for Warhammer Quest's expansion pack, Lair of the Orc Lord, which was another thing that I just became utterly obsessed with. And this issue, though it didn't have new rules, just really got me excited to pick it up and play with it. And then you've got new rules for the Leman Russ Demolisher and Imperial Air Power in Epic, giving you some more utility for this issue. The whole thing ended with an enormous 4-player tank battle, featuring 11 Imperial Guard tanks versus 15 Space Marine tanks, as well as plenty of squads besides. This was just one of those big, silly games that was fun to read about. And this was a time before Forge World and Apocalypse and Imperial Knights, when games just weren't that big. This was where you went to see that kind of cinematic scale action. Plus, there was an ad for the single greatest event that Games Workshop ever ran, Screaming Death. It was an incredible roadshow event that pit orcs and goblins against Skaven, and I won a t-shirt for my contribution. A t-shirt that I kept pristine for many, many years, and I really wish I still had. I think Martha would just about fit into it. In at number 2 is issue 195. The Interrogator Chaplain Asmodai by Mark Gibbons graces the cover of this legendary Fat Dwarf issue, and boy is it a good one. You've got the Spire Hunters debuting for Necromunda, some interesting ideas about scenario writing, the Legion of the Damned celebrating the 100th Games Workshop store, and a Warhammer Quest scenario of sorts. This is an issue that speaks to a Games Workshop of a very different era. Issue 195 comes from a time when my life was consumed by Warhammer and Citadel miniatures. Nothing like today, of course. It was an amazing period. Necromunda was released, Warhammer Quest was still about, and the two battle games were, even if not at their tightest rules-wise, incredibly good fun to play. This issue absolutely reminds me of the time it came out. I open my copy and I am flung through the warp to 1996. And secondly, or rather most importantly, this issue features Gav Thorpe's reimagining of the Lost Skaven supplement for Warhammer Quest. Originally announced as a dedicated adventure pack like the Lair of the Orc Lord or the Catacombs of Terror, the Skaven Quest feels to me like a real loss. We don't know why it never got released, but here we get a new card cutout tile, new cards to use in the game, new Skaven villains like Quirik and his Rat Golem as well. It's not a complete quest package, but by Warpstone is it fun. And what more could I ask for than some of my favourite minis taking centre stage in one of my favourite games? I asked my patrons about their favourite issues of White Dwarf, and there were some incredible suggestions. So before we get to my first pick, let's just quickly take a look at some of those. Hamilton suggested issue 212 for its magnificent Blanche cover and generally cool content, like a Sisters of Battle preview. Zingbo couldn't make a call between 107 or 108, and with the two issues including stuff like Carrick Mound's Battle Report, the Norse Army List, and a Woofrup adventure featuring Ambles, I'm really not surprised. Green Squander suggested issue 215, the issue which featured the tremendous Full Tilt minigame. Definitely a winner as well. And Michael Hans joined others in suggesting 238, the issue that previewed the brand new Mordheim game and even gave away a free Aeoner Sword of Twilight Metal Mini. Hard to top any of those, really, and on any other day, any one of them could be the winner. But not today, because today, my favourite issue is issue 119. As well as all the awesome art and heavy metal that you would expect to see in any White Dwarf, this issue is packed with some incredible features, all of which are behind another awesome David Gallagher cover. This time, some orc boys really getting stuck into the mud. The characters from the interesting Warhammer Fantasy novel Zaragos are presented for use in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. These are not the most amazing characters, but they are fun nonetheless, and I really like the idea of taking characters I've read about and placing them into the adventures that I'm running. Alongside that, there is an overview from Rick Priestley of the original Spartan Land Raider, and a guide on how to build one. For fans of speculative GW history like myself, there's a tremendous preview of the Battlefleet Gothic game that never came out. A lot of this beautiful Jez Goodwin material was reused later, but whatever this BFG might have been, it had long since changed by the time the game we know as Battlefleet Gothic was released a decade later. And then we get to the truly classic stuff, an entry in the ongoing White Dwarf series that expanded on the great port city of Marienburg for Woofrup, this time providing a great deal more detail on the mighty sewer dock and the legendary tavern, the Pelican's Perch. There are extracts from the Realm of Chaos, the Lost and the Damned, which are just always great to see. Plus, there's this Chaos Warrior riding a Triceratops. And then there's something else, which, I can't quite remember what it was. Oh yeah, the Skaven. Jez Goodwin and Rick Priestley reteam after the vengeance of the Lichmaster to update and expand on their original Skaven article, providing an overview of these ratified mutant menaces in fantastic fashion. There's information on their history, the clans, Warpstone, and their weapons, and it's all just great, absolutely dripping with character and immersion. So there is my list, my 5 favourite White Dwarves as of today. Whether or not that changes by the time we speak again, who knows? But I tell you what, I would love to know, what are your favourite issues of White Dwarf and why? So please feel free to leave those in the comments below. And let's get a discussion going about what makes a great White Dwarf in the first place. And don't forget that you can get 10% off at Into the AM using my link in the description below. I also want to take a quick moment to thank Ian Aitken of Darkblade's workshop for all of his help in filling the gaps in my White Dwarf collection. He's been incredibly generous and just an all-around great guy. So thank you, Ian. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. Yeah, I'm pretty confident that's the top 5. Although, there's some more over there as well. Might need to start on the list again.